Hello, and welcome to Health and Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we take a dive into the world of health and fitness, where we learn to overcome adversity to pick back first fiction and see health and fitness in a whole new light. We're going to have a fun episode today. I could just tell by my guest's energy right now. She is ecstatic to be here. This should be a nice, fun conversation about a topic that all of us are all too familiar with, and that is our favorite alcohol system. I'm sure you saw the title, so you're like, yes, booze. But anyway, without further ado, let's welcome to the show, Lily. Lily, it's an absolute pleasure to have you today.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited to be here. You're right, ecstatic. What a great word. Yes.
One of my favorite words is static. I don't know. It just kind of rolls off the tongue a little bit. There's words I don't like and there's words I like. It's weird how we have this like connection to words. But that's another conversation, I guess. But anyway, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into alcohol-free coaching.
Well, I got into alcohol-free coaching through the alcohol. I was absolutely addicted to alcohol. And it was scary. It was so scary because I always thought that people who were addicted to alcohol were scary. And that I thought that I thought it meant that your life was out of control and that if you quit drinking, you would need to detox and you could die. And I thought it meant that you were getting DUIs and relationships were failing and you were losing jobs. And what I learned was that alcohol use disorder is a spectrum. And the people that I just described are at the top 10%. Like they are physically full on addicted to alcohol. And it is dangerous and you do need medical supervision. The other 90% of us wouldn't think of ourselves as really having much of a problem until maybe you bump into like a sober October or a dry January and you go to quit and you're like, oh, that actually wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. And that's what happened to me. Oh, Anthony, I had this great plan. And this was such a great plan. I was going through a divorce. And even though I had mad skills for personal growth because I'd done years of therapy, I thought I could take a little shortcut. And that shortcut was I'd just have a few drinks every night, it'd take the edge off, and that would make the process easier. And then I thought after a year, I actually, said a year, I was going to stop. And I went to stop and I couldn't. And no one was more stunned than me. And I was drinking at that point, maybe half a bottle of wine a night, maybe 3/4 of a bottle of wine. And at the end, fast forward like 6-10 years later, I'm sitting in front of Netflix every night with finishing a bottle of wine, wanting more, and freaked out. So I don't know if that resonates with anybody.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
I'm sure it does. What was the next step after you said, oh my God, I can't do this?
Why? Well, you have that moment of awareness like, oh, this isn't good. And like I said, my life wasn't falling apart. I mean, I was madly in love with my husband. We have a brilliant relationship. The only thing he ever said was that he wasn't going to tell me how to live my life, which is part of why I love him, but he was worried about my drinking. And I said, yeah, baby, I know I'm worried too. And so I did what pretty much everybody does, which is just assume that everything I've heard about alcohol and quitting alcohol was true. And the crazy thing is, AA started in 1934. I think the frontal lobotomy was invented in 1935. I'm just telling you where science was with mental health. And it hasn't changed. And so our belief system around alcohol is really from 1934. And let's face it, we know a lot more about our brains than we did in 1934. So I was doing the classic, it's like the Steve Martin joke, how to make $1 million and not pay taxes. First, get $1 million, right? And that's how habit change is looked at. Like you're a fitness dude, like if you're not showing up for your workouts, double down. Just get in there and work out and beat yourself up if you don't do it, right? Like the solution is to just force it on yourself. And if you don't make your workout, then say you're a terrible person and you suck. I don't know.
Don't recommend that, but yes.
and that's what quitting alcohol is for most people. Like, so I would wake up in the morning and I'd be like, okay, today I'm not going to drink. And I'm super disciplined and I have self-control and I'm a good person. And at 5 p.m. I'd have that glass of wine in my hand and I would have my excuses ready or whatever. And then I'd wake up at 3 a.m. just beating myself up. Oh my God, what is wrong with me? Why can't I stop? And then I would stop and I'd stop for a few weeks or a few months. But willpower is finite and it will always fail. That's why the old methodology of quitting was you have to go to meetings every day because you have to recharge your willpower.
Takes a long time to develop a habit, and that's with anything.
Well, here's something super interesting, Anthony. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. B.J. Fogg out of Stanford.
Not really.
He studied this, and I think you will really enjoy his work. He studied habit change. He did a meta-analysis, meaning he grabbed up all the best studies that were around, and he studied those, and then he created a laboratory starting from there and studied further on. And what he learned was it wasn't how many reps, it wasn't how much time, it wasn't how much you beat yourself up. The secret to habit change is positive emotion. Isn't that crazy?
I can relate because then it's like exercise, right? So it sucks while you're doing it and you're just questioning yourself, why am I doing this? And then afterwards you get such a big serotonin and dopamine boost.
Right?
It becomes addicting because then you're like, ooh, I want that again. And then you go back and you do it again. And then you go back and you do it again just to get that energy that you get after it. And that's like a lot of things in life, right? So we get connected to our phones, I think is a great case in point. We scroll through Facebook or Instagram looking for that little dopamine hit once we find something our brains like, and then becomes addictive. So it's the same process no matter what you're talking about.
Right. And so you are so spot on, whether or not it's a video game, pornography, gambling, alcohol, heroin.
We did one on pornography about like 6 months ago.
Okay.
So this is all still fresh, but that was a crazy episode. I highly recommend people check it out.
I'm sure it was. It's the same mechanism in our brains. Anything that hyperstimulates our reward system, that we get to that from an unnatural way, like all of those things you just listed, here's what happens. Our reward system gets hyperstimulated, giant dopamine hit, and our brains go, whoa, this is so awesome. Woohoo, yay, I'm really having fun. And that lasts for 20 minutes. And then our brain says, hold on, this is too much. I'm out of balance. I got way too much endorphins going on here. I need to smack this down. And so what happens is the brain releases about 2 to 3 hours worth of not feel good chemicals. So you went for that 20 to 30 minute high, you get smacked down, and you get 2 to 3 hours of dynorphin, adrenaline, cortisol, things like that don't feel good. And So what you've just done is borrowed joy from a loan shark. So if you started out maybe on a scale of 1 to 10 that you felt like you were a 5 or 6 on the happiness scale, you hit that dopamine, woohoo. Now you're at a 7 or 8. Then you get the dynorphin smackdown and you're down to a 3 or a 4. So you got your hit, but your interest payment was severe. And what's causing that addiction is all in your subconscious. It's saying, you know what? I don't feel so good anymore. Oh, wait, I got an idea. That alcohol or that video game or whatever it is gave me a big hit of endorphins. I'm going to do that again. And that's where you end up chasing your tail and the addiction cycle starts. And what's so crazy and what made me so angry is I believed that an alcoholic, which I don't use that word, I use alcohol use disorder, but back in the day, I believed an alcoholic was someone who had something wrong with them. Bless them. They were doing the best they could. But secretly, we're all thinking they like the alcohol more than they like their family or whatever. And if it was important enough to them, they really would stop, even though it's hard. And what I learned, and this just chapped my ass, we are physically designed to become addicted. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not diseased. It's more like if you think about like a gene turning on. That's not necessarily what's happening, but it's like that in that once you start introducing the alcohol or the pornography or the gambling into the system, it fires up the system that gets you addicted. And that made me so mad. Because you believe people, right? You believe that at the end of the day, a drink causes no harm. In fact, some people believe that it actually improves your health. Alcohol in moderation improves your health. That's another thing that really chaps my ass. That's really, and we used to believe that about cigarettes. And it used to be you'd go to the doctor's office and your doctor would be smoking. And yeah, have a cigarette. It will relax you. And I promise you, in 30 years, people are going to look at alcohol like they look at cigarettes.
So I have 2 interesting points for you, and I'd love to get your reaction on both of these. I'm going to go back to what you said before about turning on an addiction because that's where we get our biggest dopamine hits, right? So we did a bunch of episodes on creating goals, right? So for the podcast, my goal is to get a lot more listeners, blah, 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 blah. And that's actually, it's proven time and time again, our best dopamine hits and our best happiness comes from in pursuit of a goal. It's not accomplishing the goal. It's as you're getting there. And that's linked or at least correlated with overall happiness levels. So those that have something they're shooting for in their lives, regardless of what it is, when they're pursuing that goal, they're happy. When they no longer have drive and they don't have goals that they're shooting for, that's when you start getting depression. And they think that this is related to what's been going on now with mental health, is a lot of people no longer have aspirations. There's no longer the drive to do things that we used to want to do. A great example of this is a previous episode we did for men. Men's biggest drive used to be protect, provide, and populate. So those were our 3 biggest drives, but that's being stripped from us. So now it's depression because we want to go for those things. We're told by society we're not allowed to. So it's really interesting to hear that because then what we return to is alcohol, cigarettes, gambling, drugs, because we're striving for different ways to get that dopamine hit, but overall it's going to lead us down a depression spiral.
That makes a lot of sense. And what is just a fun factoid for you is the most amount of dopamine that happens, the happiest you will be is when you are reaching for the alcohol or just made the order with your wait person.
Yeah.
Because the anticipatory dopamine hit is huge, and you will never be happier than that moment with alcohol, because as I explained, after that, once you drink it, you actually get smacked down with all those nasty, not feel good chemicals. And so the only time you don't have the not feel good chemicals is when you're reaching for it. And here's a super interesting thing about goals, and it kind of rocked my world. What I work with and my own goals in life are no longer behavior-based goals. They are emotionally based goals. And so, for example, I don't want to stop drinking. I want to have joy in my life. And the process that I work through with my clients is to find that joy in your life. We use alcohol to solve problems, just as you were saying, I'm stressed, I'm depressed. I don't have any goals in my life. So you use alcohol to numb that. And what we need to do is learn skills to find out that we can find those things again. In fact, joy is a skill.
Oh, yeah. Finding happiness is a skill. And we're gonna have a little fun, Lily. I think we're gonna have fun.
I'm ready. Bring it.
So I think it's important to get for a lot of people is we could talk about this, right? Back and forth. But to really understand, I think it's easier to see kind of everything in action. So I'm gonna use myself and pitch my life, and then we can kind of coach my life through it. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that.
Oh, I'm in.
All right. So let's go back to young Anthony many, many, many years ago, once upon a time. God bless. Anyway, depressed, not happy with life, very at a really rough point. And I had to choose I did this in the 7th grade. I had to choose to be happy. And that's as a 12-year-old. I was like, okay, I can either be done or choose to be happy. And then I had to reprogram my brain to be happy. I didn't have help. I did it all myself. But that was a life skill that we're talking about right now. Is that me teaching myself that has helped me more than anything else in my life. Because it didn't matter what life threw at me, I was able to pull myself out of really deep depression and now be happy and be able to tolerate different situations. And this leads towards alcohol. And like everybody else, 17, 18, you start drinking, your friends are drinking. And then time to hit college, you're really exposed to it. I went to one of the biggest drinking schools in New York. So really heavily involved. Drank like 4 or 5 nights a week and a lot. So it wasn't like it was a little bit. Even after college, drank 4 or 5 nights a week, and it was a lot. And it got to the point where my mother thought I was addicted. And she came to me and said, Anthony, like, I think you're addicted to drinking. I was like, Mom, I promise you I'm not. And she goes, no, I really think you are. I was like, I will bet my life I'm not addicted because I know how to program my brain. I'm going back to when I was going in 7th grade, when I was in 7th grade, to stop. I don't drink to be happy. I drink because I wanted to go out, hang out with people, and meet girls was always the thing, you know? So my mom made a bet with me. She goes, all right, bet me you won't drink anymore. I was like, deal, you stop eating sugar. I think you're addicted to sugar. It was like, you always complain about how you're overweight, and, you know, you give up sugar, I'll give up alcohol. Let's see who could go longer. Guess how long that bet lasted?
How long?
6.5 months. It got to the point we boarded a cruise ship, and we both looked at each other and just went, all right, truce. let's call it even, because we're both stubborn and not able to, like, it didn't matter to us. And at that point, what I learned is kind of what you're explaining was being dry for so long. I didn't miss the hangovers where you're depressed, because alcohol is a depressant. It makes you feel very down. You have no drive for the next days. And trying to wake yourself up. My hangovers lasted 3.5 days. Like trying to get through and move my life up was impossible because of how hungover I was. So I made a decision then that yes, I'm gonna drink. I love beer. Taste of beer to me is like soda for most people. I don't drink any soda, but I love the taste of beer. I was like, I need to find balance. So now the way I drink now is I have one drink maybe once a week, and half the time it's not alcoholic because I hooked up with Athletic Brewing Company.
Oh, I love Athletic Brew.
We
Their
did a couple of
IPA is a bomb.
Oh, awesome! I hooked up with them to the show, and I go through a lot of them. I love the taste of beer.
Love
Something
them.
about hops is just it gets me.
Have you done hoppy water?
I haven't tried hoppy water, but I've heard good things.
You might like hoppy water. I mean, it's not the big hit, but it's like refreshing during the day to have a hoppy water as a little treat, I think.
So my question to you is, if you were to psychoanalyze that in my life, how could we use that information to help others?
Well, I think that, like you, I was navigating depression from a very young age. Had some trauma. It was in my 20s that I made the decision whether or not I was going to keep living or not. And like you, I decided it was going to be on my terms. And I did get help. I was very dangerously depressed and wouldn't have made it without my therapist. And what I would say is that I don't so much psychoanalyze as I would give you some tools.
Love it. Let's hear it.
So when you and your mom were doing that bet, my guess is you were really focused on, I'm not drinking. I'm not going to let my mom win this. I'm just not gonna, like stubborn, right? I'm hearing stubborn.
My focus was actually, I want to make my mom healthier.
God, love that so
She would
much.
she would get like a thing of Twizzlers and just start nibbling on them. And like, I don't eat candy, period. I don't like it. I don't like high sugary foods.
I don't eat it either.
So I was just like, Mom, stop. I can't. I was like, I want to make you stop.
You used something positive. You weren't pushing it, fighting against yourself. You were using positive. You wanted your mom to be healthy. Now, what you're going to learn in life is that you got to stay in your own lane. Your mom's only going to be healthy if she wants to be healthy. You really can't control that. But it's very adorable that you love her so much that you were willing to do that for her. What I think that would have been helpful for you in that time was if you had understood what alcohol was doing to your body. And it's super interesting that you at that point were worried about your mother's health. And my guess is you didn't have a lot of information. What did you believe were the health implications of alcohol at that time?
Oh, I knew the consequences of drinking too much. I mean, just as at that same point was when I was really learning about fitness and actually planning on becoming a trainer, opening my own facilities. I knew, like, science-wise, alcohol is 7 calories per gram, and it's all empty calories, and your workouts suck after having a couple of beers.
Right?
That you feel after like 4 drinks at one night, you feel the effects in the gym 10 days later. Where you don't mentally feel it, but you feel it when you're exerting yourself.
Here is a fascinating study that I think you'll like. I wish I could remember the dude who did it. It's out of Australia, Australian amateur football players. They took muscle biopsies before their workout. They worked them all out the same. And then at the end of the workout, they gave them enough alcohol that they would be just legally drunk. Right? So not a huge amount. Maybe for an Australian footy, it would take me out. But probably for these big fellas, It wasn't that much alcohol. And then they took muscle biopsies a couple hours after the drinking, and then they took them, I believe, the next day. And they did things like add in, some people got carbohydrates, some people got carbohydrates and protein, trying all the permutations. The athletes that drank, their muscles were recovering 37% more slowly than the athletes that didn't drink. And this is because when we ingest alcohol in our system, it is both fat and water soluble. And so it gets in. I don't know if you have ever camped on sand, but if you camp on sand, you got sand everywhere. You got it in your ears, your eyes. You pull out your camping gear 6 months later, it's in your tent. It's like, that's alcohol in your body because it is water and fat soluble. It's getting everywhere. And so for the short term and just that drinking, this is just one drink. Your body has shut down everything else to get rid of it. The chemical formula for the alcohol you put in your body is identical to the chemical formula of the ethanol you put in your car. Letter for letter, number for number, it's identical. So your body has stopped everything to get this poison out of your system. The buzz comes from the poison detoxifying out of your system. And what you'll notice is, and this is a little thought experiment for people, you only get that buzz after the first drink. You never get that buzz back. You get drunk, but that happy buzz, only number one. And so the alcohol is going into your gut, and it is burning a hole in your gut, and you're getting leaky gut. So now all the goop that is supposed to stay in your gut that you poop out later is being exposed to your bloodstream. That's how the poisons are circulating through your body. So that's how it's affecting you in the short term. The other thing it does is it disrupts your sleep. And we have 7 to 8 sleep cycles in a healthy night. The last 2 cycles, the REMs, which are where we process the previous day's information and emotion, are the longest. They're 40 to 50 minutes in a healthy sleep cycle. You don't get those when you drink alcohol. So that's why you're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And also the other thing is all of the depressants have worn off, but the adrenaline is still there. So if you drink one drink, you've raised your cortisol levels for the next week. 1. If you drink one drink a night, 5 to 7 nights a week, that's the equivalent of, I think it was 7 to 15 cigarettes. Alcohol has the same poisons in it that cigarettes do. Not the nicotine, it's acetaldehyde or something like that. So that's the short term, what it's doing to your body. Long term, and I'm not talking about alcoholics, once again in air quotes, I'm talking about people who are having 5 to 7 drinks a week, increase in breast cancer, colon rectal cancer, dementia. The World Heart Organization has said there is no safe level of alcohol for your heart. So this idea that a glass of red wine is good for your heart, it's bullshit. There's no safe level. And I'm not saying that like, oh, everybody needs to be perfect and she's being all judgy and she drank too much before and now she's like all evangelical. I'm just telling you what I wish I knew. Because I would never have smoked a cigarette. Never. I mean, I tried a few when I was a kid, but I just wasn't a smoker because it was so dangerous. Liver cancer, liver disease, it affects your kidneys. Obviously, it's dehydrating your body in the short term. So all that's going on. So while it's awesome that you were worried about your mom's health, what do you think that was doing to your health now that I give you that information?
Yeah, I mean, going back to teenage Anthony. So when you're in your 20s, early 20s, and teenagers, you don't give a shit. And that's the. I think that's every human being ever. You don't care what you're doing. You just maybe to an extent for some people, but it's very hard to find someone who fully cares at that age about how it's going to affect their lives 40, 50 years from now.
Right.
You just can't think that far ahead until you're 25, especially men. It takes us way too long for our frontal lobe to develop, and we're just
it's
not
not
processing.
meeting up. We're misfiring. It's going.
Yeah,
it's not connecting up there.
Yeah, and it's kind of. I mean, this is kind of how I live life, right? So there's a perfect way to do anything, right? It's food is a great example. It's a perfect way to eat. There's a perfect way to make sure you're not getting pesticides or anything in your food, or making sure you're only eating the right types of foods, not having too high saturated fat contents, make sure you're getting enough protein. Living perfect sucks.
Oh, really? You see it that way?
I honestly think, and I'm saying this as somebody who lives and dies this health and fitness realm, you need, at least to some extent, to learn to just relax. Because people get, and I say sucks because people get intense about everything. Everything's overdone. Everything's overanalyzed.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
For example, steps. How many steps a day? Their ideal steps a day is 15,000. I know people who can't go to sleep at night because they're too worried about hitting their 15,000 steps. They're too worried about making sure, okay, it's 9:40. I got to get to bed now. This is my bedtime, 9:40. So you have to take everything in life and really pick what's going to keep you sane, where you're not going to overanalyze, because ultimately at the end of the day, you should do what's going to help you down the line. I believe like exercise is one of the most important things you can do in your life. Eating right is one of the most important things, but I'm not perfect. For example, my birthday, every birthday I eat 2 pieces of baklava. It is the only like sweet thing I eat, but you know what? I'm not going to deprive myself once a year. It maybe it'll have some side effects down the line, but I don't do it every day. I don't do it every week. It's intermittent.
It's a treat, right?
Yeah.
It's a treat. What's interesting, and I really love about this conversation, is your use of the word deprivation.
Correct.
And that's really interesting. And where I am coming from with alcohol in my own life, once again, not judging anybody else for anything. I think I told you earlier before we came on that if I was a glass house, the tiniest puff of wind would crack me. I am not a person who is going to be throwing stones here. I am someone who wants to educate you so that you can make the choices you want to have you feel your best. And 2 questions I often ask people are, does it feel good? And does it help? And I used to believe that drinking alcohol felt good. And what I learned was, for me, it didn't. I learned about the cycle that I really only got that 20 minutes, and I borrowed the joy from a loan shark. And I learned that you cannot selectively numb. So if you think you're drinking alcohol to numb out the bad things, here's the truth. You're also numbing out the good things.
That's why I'm going to chime in real quick, because I think this is an important distinction. And I got to talk about something else real quick. But I don't drink to numb out bad things. I actually totally agree with you on that. I'm going to be very clear about this. Actually, if I have a bad day, I hate drinking. I won't even touch an alcoholic drink if I'm having a bad day, because it's just going to screw me up mentally, and I don't want to deal with any kind of depressants. What I actually do if I'm having like the worst day possible, I exercise. I go to the gym and I work it off, and then I feel better and I can think clearer and move forward. So I think that's a great distinction, is don't drink if you're trying to cover an emotion. Mm-hmm. That's when you're going to lead to issues. If you're drinking to cover a negative emotion, then it's just a temporary Band-Aid. And like you said, you're gonna get more depressed from it.
Mhm.
I 100% agree with you on that. But I do want to talk real quick because I supposed to do this like 15 minutes ago, but about our nutrition services offered at Redefine Fitness. So a lot of things we talk about, and it's also mentioned in this show, it's all about forming habits. That's how we take our nutrition approach. This isn't telling you what to eat. I'm not going to sit here and write a plan that says eat 4 ounces of chicken, 3 pieces of asparagus. But instead, we're going to teach you how to eat the foods you enjoy while maintaining a healthy lifestyle. And that really is the most distinct thing is I want to give you the tools to make sure that this is something you can do for the rest of your life. So you don't need us because you know how to eat. That way, we offer 2 different separate nutrition programs. We have our basic and we have our advanced. Anthony, what's the difference? Our basic is monthly check-ins. This is for people who just really want to kind of get on track, don't really need too much hand-holding and figure it out on their own. And then we have our advanced program, which gives you 24/7 access to your coach, weekly check-ins at a restaurant, not sure what to eat, snap a picture of the menu, send it to your coach, and they'll help you make the right decisions at that restaurant to make sure it fits into what kind of habits they're trying to establish for you. So guys, as always, for my podcast listeners, we're offering 10% off our services at Redefine Fitness. For anyone that listens to the show, just mention the term podcast. You will receive 10% off. To find out more, either give us a call, check out our website, www.redefine-fitness.com, or shoot us an email at staff@redefine-fitness.com. Links are in the show notes, guys. Anyway, going back to kind of what we were talking about, Lily, is the distinction of not drinking to cover a negative. I think
Right.
is the most important thing to take away from it, and probably the biggest thing I can get behind about alcohol free. I made it clear that I still have a drink now and then, but I never drink when I'm having a bad day, ever.
So smart. That is so smart because that's what got me in trouble was drinking to numb some emotions. And this is another thing that just chapped my ass is that the amount that I was drinking. So if you're a daily drinker and you're getting these big dopamine hits and then your brain says too much, we covered that. What happens is your brain stops creating those chemicals naturally. Because why would it? Our brains are lazy by design because we want to expend the least amount of energy for survival. So if you're someone who's having those drinks to have that dopamine hit, you lose the ability to create dopamine naturally. And that is why I say it has sucked the joy out of my life. Because things that used to bring you joy, like your kid's birthday party or a sunset or a sunrise, no longer. You start hearing this in your head or even saying it out loud. Let's get a bottle of wine and watch the sunset. Let's get a bottle of wine and go to the movies. Or I need a bottle of wine to walk around with the kids at Halloween to enjoy myself. And you find out if you take that bottle of wine out or whatever your drink of choice is, you start thinking, oh, that's not going to be fun anymore.
Yeah, and that's never should be the case.
Right?
Ever.
And that's because the wine literally hijacked your dopamine system. Or for me, it was wine. Everybody's different. The alcohol hijacks your dopamine system, your reward system. And you're not creating those happy hormones anymore. And I'm sure you notice that, like you said, on the days that you do have a drink, you feel it the next day. Yeah, absolutely. You feel it the next day.
Multiple drinks is when, if my cap is 2. That's when I know I'm not going to feel it afterwards. Anything after 2, I'll feel, I don't know, the next day after that. So I don't ever more than that. I'm going to throw a curveball into our conversation real quick.
Oh, love it. Ready.
I think a worse hijacker of dopamine than alcohol is this.
Oh, the phones. Yeah, it's bad.
I think out of everything that you want to talk about taking joy out of people's lives, because alcohol, at least, you have to order it, you have to find it. There's times when it's not socially acceptable, aka driving. So there's points in drinking that we've kind of established as a society that it's not okay. This is supposed to be in our pockets, and for those that are listening to audio, it's my phone, are 24/7 attached to us, by the bedsides with us, to the point I go out to eat with my wife, and I see couples scrolling through their phones, not talking to each other.
Isn't it heartbreaking?
Heartbreaking. And like, you're not enjoying each other's company. You're instead looking for the dopamine hit in your phone,
right,
as opposed to your significant other who you love. So you're going to forget that you went out with them. You're going to forget the little times and laughs you had. And I think it's impacted and hijacked our brains more than alcohol could ever do, to, especially on a mass population side. But there are people that alcohol is definitely worse for, but I think phones are just the cake.
I think that it is cumulative, because what's happening is we are on such an unnatural dopamine. I don't know the right word. Dopamine is coming at us at unnaturally high levels. It used to be when we were hunter-gatherers, we would find a raspberry, we'd put it in our mouths, we'd get a dopamine hit. Remember, dopamine is the learning module or molecule, not the pleasure molecule. We get the pleasure because evolutionarily we wanted to say when something worked for us, we wanted more of it. So it's the more. And unfortunately, you are so right on this. It is the computers, the phones, I used to refuse to carry my phone when I was out in the woods. And then I fell, and it was dusk, it was winter, and I didn't have my phone.
There are benefits. Like, don't get me wrong. There are benefits to having
And
your
so
phone.
now I accept to carry my phone, but I turn the ringer off so no one can disturb my run. Like, the only reason that I'm going to put, and I did actually on a trail run recently break my arm, and I was grateful that I had a phone to call someone to get me out of there. But so yeah, there's benefits, but you can limit them. And unfortunately, what's happening is because we have it coming at us, and because our brains have stopped producing it naturally, when you don't use your phone or when you don't have the alcohol, you're getting a cortisol hit. Cortisol making you feel agitated, that's supposed to remind you to do the thing to get the dopamine. And there is, I don't know, 1 to 2 week period of time where you're not getting, if you stop these behaviors, you're not getting the dopamine from the thing like the phone or the alcohol or the whatever, and you're not producing it naturally. So you have this, let's say, 2 week period that it's very uncomfortable. And you got to get through that 2 weeks. And that's why so many people can't get to day 2 or day 3 or day 4, because they're getting these cortisol dumps that they're uncomfortable. But you know what? If you know it's a cortisol dump and it's going to last 20 minutes, that's way easier. Knowledge is power. Like, oh, cortisol dump. Got it. 5 p.m. Post dog walk. Body's expecting dopamine. I can either find another way to give it a dopamine hit via exercise or laughing or some other thing, or I could just ride it out, but it will go away. But man, you are so dead on with the dopamine overload. Some people suggest that going on like a dopamine, what's the word I'm looking for when you, a dopamine cleanse. Put the phones down, put the computers down. I call that backpacking, but that's just me.
This is going to be funny, but this is why I go on cruises. Because I don't get the phone plan. So that's my way of saying, I get this, and I love it. I'm so excited to go on a cruise because it's like I get to turn my phone off, leave me alone. Especially as a business owner, my phone doesn't stop. It's nonstop going off. I tell my wife this all the time. I hate social media. I think it's a poison. It does more bad than good in our society because people don't have to control themselves on it. If I didn't have a business, I would not have social media. There would.
Right.
I unfortunately have to because that's how we get our business. But if eventually it's going to be
Different methods. Yeah, I love
yeah.
this is podcast, these conversations, educating people, I think, are so much healthier than social media.
I love clearly.
I love it too. I love my podcast. Yeah.
All right, Lily, I'm going to ask you before we get to the final two questions, just because I feel like we've jumped all around a lot today.
It's been fun.
It's been fun, but I want to just give some clarifying points. So, what would be a big, I don't want to say like step process because that's what AA uses, but what's the best way for somebody who's listening to take this and have it in digestible information from the show as like a take home? This is what I need to work on. This is where you should go next.
I would go with looking for your joy. And I would do some experimentation. In my work, I know that a lot of programs just are like, day one, you got to stop. That's not where I come from. I got my certification through Annie Grace, This Naked Mind, which I highly recommend people getting that book and doing the alcohol experiment. It's a 30-day experiment, judgment-free space where you just explore, hey, where am I with alcohol? Maybe I'm on the alcohol use disorder spectrum, but maybe I'm really low on it right now. And it would be not a big deal. I could read this book, listen to Anthony's podcast, and be like, okay, I'm going to think about the way I drink. Maybe you're middling where I was. I call it a gray area drinker. You know, you're not a serious alcoholic, hate that word. But you're headed into troubled waters, right? The most important thing is self-compassion. And so when I start working with someone, we don't just stop drinking, we start learning. We learn why we use alcohol, how we use it. So instead of saying you got to quit drinking, I would be more likely to say to you, okay, so you had a drink. We call those data points. What did you learn? And if you're someone who wants to stop, let's say, you know, you're on this 30-day alcohol experiment and you're going to take a break, or you're doing dry January, instead of beating yourself up in the morning because you drank, I would ask you, okay, well, how were you feeling before you drank? Were you stressed? What was going on? Was it a social cue? And then I would ask you to think, wow, if I want to head towards feeling better and not drinking, what could I change in my behavior today that will put me a step closer tomorrow? So instead of, someone said to me yesterday, and it made so much sense, don't be mad at a bud for being a bud. It needs time to flower. So give yourself, and so there are no mistakes. The goal is to question your relationship with alcohol. And if you decide you want to cut back, or if you decide that you want to stop altogether, then start making some steps towards that and look at what you're getting, not what you're missing. So there's no FOMO, there's JOMO. Joy of missing out.
Okay. That took me a second. I was like,
FOMO, fear of missing out. JOMO, joy of missing out. Do the 2 weeks of discomfort. If you're a little bit addicted, you're going to have those 2 weeks. Not a big deal. You might have some data points. Not a big deal. Alcohol's not your enemy. This isn't something to fight. It's something to learn about and head towards the beautiful life that you want.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, I like that. That's a good explanation of our relationship with alcohol. I got two funny questions for you.
All right.
How do you feel about kombucha?
Oh my gosh, I love kombucha.
See, kombucha has alcohol in it.
A very, very small amount of alcohol. But if you work in a nuclear power plant, do not drink kombucha because it will show up in your blood tests.
Really?
Yeah, I have a girlfriend whose husband works in nuclear energy, and he was drinking kombucha, and one of his friends got fired for kombucha. Yeah, so I drink kombucha. It's not enough to hit your reward center at such a high that you're artificially raising your dopamine levels. So same thing with alcohol-free beer or even the really low alcohol stuff.
Yeah, so I guess the question is, what's the percentage cutoff? What's the ABV cutoff on whether you're going to get a reward hit or not? Because kombucha, I think, is probably wrong. I think it's 1%, where a typical Bud Light, I think, is 3%. So,
I don't know, and I never answer a question I don't have the actual answer for.
hey, I want my listeners to figure it out for us, though. What's the cutoff? Because if you have there's beer that's like 1.5%. Like, is that really even beer at that point? So you need two of those to have one typical drink.
I think it's close to 5% with a beer. Well, I don't know. I just know that kombucha is way under that line.
Interesting. And then the second question. You ever see the series How Beer Saved the World?
No. Oh, is that about how there was not fresh drinking water available?
Correct.
Right. Okay, I have heard of it. Right. So if you don't have fresh drinking water, it might be a good option. But if you do have fresh drinking water, I would recommend the water.
So here's the caveat on that story, which is very interesting, and then we'll wrap this up. Beer was discovered back in Mesopotamia times. We want to talk about how long ago it was accidentally discovered, and it was disgusting back then. But the ABV on those beers is half of what it is now. So you would need to have multiple of really to get. Like, no one would ever get drunk. They would just feel tipsy because of how low the ABV was. You couldn't fit enough liquid in your stomach to get drunk. But if you drank that, you would live a lot longer, because if you drank the water, you die of dysentery and everything else, because the water was not sanitary back then.
So like a kombucha would do the same trick now, or very low. I'm remembering Colorado near beer in college, and it was like 0.05% alcohol, and that's what we could buy legally.
Yeah, so it was. I think it was a little higher than that. I think it was closer to like one.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, but interesting, that evolved. And then we go into the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages, beer is what it is now, around the same ABV back in the Middle Ages, but the same problem with the water. You couldn't drink the water, especially in like London, Dublin, like those big cities. They were just asking for issues. So everyone was just buzzed 24/7.
Oh, I had to be awful. They had to feel terrible.
Yeah, there was no other option. It was right? Drink the beer or die from drinking the water. So it's like 50-50. And they say that the Industrial Revolution, the backbone of it, wasn't technology, but it was the introduction of coffee that came over from South America. Because once coffee got introduced, we were learning how to boil off our water and get rid of the bacteria. So people were able to supplement coffee for beer. And then it increased people were no longer hammered all the time. So it was a lot easier to get things done and motivate us in technology to move forward. So it's really interesting watching evolution, how much of an impact alcohol made and how much of an impact the switch to coffee really made in the history of us.
Well, I know in the history of me, as I have the equivalent of 1 espresso a day and then decaf. It made a huge difference for me switching from alcohol to coffee. So I recommend that 350%. So that show is How Beer Saved the World.
How Beer Saved the World. Very, very interesting. I want to
watch that.
It's all factual based. It's all history. It's very cool.
Oh, I love some science.
Yeah, love me some signs. So, Lily, I'm going to wrap this up, ask you the final two questions I ask everybody. So, first one, if you were to summarize this episode in 1 to 2 sentences, what would be your take-home message?
My take-home message is learn about alcohol and make the choice that's right for you. And if you decide you want to cut back and are struggling to cut back, get some help with it. There's joy at the end of it. Stopping alcohol is not a death sentence. It is wings.
Love it. And then the second question, how can people find you, get a hold of you if they do like your service? Give us all this good stuff.
Well, my podcast is Sober Chick Life. Love for people to come and listen to Sober Chick Life. We talk about everything about alcohol related, and it's fun. And the website is simply coachingwithlily.com.
Nice and easy. Simply coachingwithlily.com. Love it. Lily, thank you for coming on, and thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Please don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever-changing field. And remember, fitness is medicine. Until next time. For us, we know what it's like to feel unhealthy, depressed, and downright defeated. We want to show others there is a right way, and through fitness, you can do anything you set your mind to. Fitness can give you that motivation, confidence, energy you need to bridge that mental gap and prevent you from missing important life events. We understand it's about feeling better, living longer, and being good examples for our kids. We understand this because we live it. And for us, that's the redefined difference.